Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds. We are back. Got the whole crew here talking about mono versus fluoro, in particular, the best leader line for saltwater fishing. This is a debate. We've talked about it before. Justin just talked to some head honcho. We're not going to mention the person's name, but someone pretty high up at Seagar, one of the top leading and top selling fluoro line brands out there, and got some good intel. I think they'd seen a few of our videos, and so we're just going to have a wide open debate about mono versus fluoro. Which one's better? The truth, like on real science stuff, not just hey, it's cool and it's hip. And I saw some young kid catching bass with fluoro that we want to use it. There's been a lot of stuff out there, right? Because we have traditional mono like Andy, which we love, and has probably landed, or not probably, has landed more world records than any other line out there on a leader line. And then now you have this fluoro is just a line. You have it as a main line. You can have it as just a leader line where you pay like 5 to 10x just to say it's leader. I don't even know if there's a difference. We're going to find out today. So who do we got here? Luke, Justin, Tony, Wyatt? Who's can you raise your hand? Who's pro fluoro versus pro mono? Pro fluoro.
Oh wow, I'm the oddball.
Wow.
I'm okay with that.
Pro mono?
I feel better now.
Right, Luke's
only one of those
Pro
hands
mono. I was pro fluoro. I was totally pro fluoro, and I'm literally mad for that. I've spent so much money over many years. Once I started actually testing the lines, so I was converted by testing.
All right. Well, I think three of the main things that most anglers would say why they use one or the other is we got strength, we got abrasion resistance, and visibility, right? And it seems like visibility is the one that you have not tested, Luke. For those of you who don't know, we'll put links in the show notes, but you have tested. Oh, there we go. Oh,
that's the next test coming up. There's the assembly.
Wow. Yeah,
that's 20 lines are going to be dunked in the water under various conditions, cloud cover, water clarities. We're going to get to the bottom of this. Oof. But yeah, I have not tested the visibility.
But you have tested strength, abrasion, and abrasion resistance. So let's start with strength. What do you guys think so far? And maybe it's everyone against Luke here. So Luke, maybe this is court. This is a courtroom. What are your findings? Come up to the podium, Mr. Simons. What are your findings so far on the strength side of things with mono versus fluoro?
Well, I've done a lot of knot tests over the years, and I've been using both mono and fluoro, and we're not picking on one brand of fluoro versus the other. Like so far, like I've been testing various brands. We're not just Andy. Actually, Stren and Berkeley Big Game actually beat Andy. I just still use Andy because it's more convenient. But every time I've done knot tests and abrasion tests, the traditional mono has outperformed the expensive fluoro every time. It's not one brand or the other. It's not like Seagar is awesome and Berkeley Vanish stinks and I'm testing out the worst one. I'm like testing out the good stuff, like the Seagars, the Vanishes, and like the Yozuri pink stuff. All of it seems to underperform mono, just traditional mono. And it's not just Andy, right? It'll lose to Berkeley Big Game, to Andy, to like original Stren. Like it's been really surprising. Again, I've been blown away.
So we're only talking strength here, not abrasion. So on the strength, what's happening? What are you finding? It's not even close?
It's I can't remember now. It's been a while since I've done. I publish it all, so like you can just go to our site and just Google line test, and it's all there. So I publish it because I know it's gonna be a little bit controversial. So I literally record the testing of it and show and I did get a new knot tester that is actually machine activated versus originally it was just me manually pulling it out, trying to do it at a consistent rate. And now we have a machine, so I need to revisit it with the machine, and then I'll be able to get some precise measurements. But at least so far, I'll be totally shocked if mono doesn't win handily on the knots. And also two different knots react differently. So I did one test a little while ago on a loop knot because a lot of us use artificials, and what we use loop knots. And the Canoe Man loop knot, I did a test on it versus the non-slip loop knot, for mono and fluoro. And it was interesting. The Canoeman was better with mono slightly, but it got crushed by the non-slip loop knot when they were both tied on a fluoro. So the different lines react to knots differently. So there's a lot of, long story short, there's a lot of nuances where it depends on the knot you're using. It depends on the brand of line you're using in many cases, that there are going to be small disparities. But in general, the overall knot strength is better with traditional mono than with fluoro, because fluoro is just a little bit more brittle, right? It's more dense, right? Its pros hurt it on its visibility pros hurt it on the strength spectrum. It's denser, it makes it a little bit more brittle, and it seems to make it cause to break sooner.
Is that your dog, or you Mexican today? You got a little gas? What's going on?
Yeah, Otis, he's outside. Let me bring him inside. He's outside and that's a sign that he wants to get too hot out.
All right, well, this is the worst courtroom ever. Like, we got witnesses leaving. What is happening here?
He has strong opinions on fluoro and mono. Just
all right, so now that Luke's not here, you guys are listening. Luke literally just left his booth. So what do you guys think on that? Did you hear anything today? Justin, you were the one who spoke in depth with Seaguar. What did they say on the strength side of things?
We talked about a lot of things. We started from like the whole history of the brand and the material of what it's made out of and how it crossed over from one industry to now in the fishing industry. And we started to really just look at 100% fluorocarbon from their testing experience, what the benefits of 100% fluorocarbon had to traditional nylon monofilament, and then even the subcategory of copolymers and copolymer lines that have fluorocarbon coatings on them. We talked for strength. We did not actually assess the means of what they use to test knot strength and like pulling power of a line. So if something was a 20-pound test fluorocarbon, we didn't talk about what tests they use to pull and determine breaking strength, for knots. I would assume it's very similar to the test that Luke has now on a machine where you tie knots and just compare and get an equated average of what the average overall breaking strength is. I don't know Seaguar's means of testing in particular, but I've noticed that when we look at all these different brands, we look at the actual size of the diameter of the line, we're noticing that the sizes are about the same across the board. Some are a little thicker, some are a little thinner. And overall, it looks like Seaguar leader, I'm trying to pull up an example here. If we look at like diameter, and really this has to do with both abrasion and strength, but if we're going to just look at it for strength, the diameter for 20-pound Seaguar is, we'll do it in inches. So it's 0.016 inches. I don't think anybody can see that. 0.016 for 20-pound. For Andy 20-pound, we're looking at, it says 0.45 millimeters. So it's hard to get the difference there, but we'll do millimeters in Seaguar. It's 0.405. So it's like a difference of 0.05 millimeter, which is minute, but they're both considered 20-pound and one's a little bit thicker than the other. So that might affect the strength overall, but it shouldn't be more than like a couple pounds, Yeah. And I think that's what you found, right?
The fair way to test it is to equate the diameters, because on average, the same rated strength, right? Like the breaking strength is never the actual rated strength, but the diameter is the best way to equate it. Because what we really want, the overall goal of all this testing has been to find truly the best line per diameter based on strength and abrasion. And so I've always tried to match diameters whenever possible. I started just doing because I wasn't really looking at diameters. For years, I was looking at a 20-pound line, a 30-pound line. I never even cared about diameter. But yeah, I think the only fair way to do it is to test the diameters, because they can put kind of whatever size they want.
Yeah, but who in the real world, who does that? I don't know any anglers. They just, they go to wherever, fishstrong.com, and they buy 30-pound leader, and they just assume it's 30-pound leader. I don't know anyone, maybe besides a couple of you knuckleheads, that's actually, it's a little bit different diameter by 0.24 centimeters or millimeters. So do you think, Justin, had you asked Seaguar on the phone, do they think their 20-pound Seaguar fluorocarbon is stronger, has better strength than 20-pound ABC company mono?
I would say they stand behind that pretty confidently. I would say they would say that they're 20-pound. If you put it up next to, a handful of competitors, 3 or 5 mainstream competitors, that it would outperform, I guess, or it would maintain 20 for sure, but that they have quality controlled tested it themselves. And
we're not trying to discredit what they're putting on their label, but is it stronger than mono? This is the mono versus fluoro. Like Luke's tests say the opposite for the same pound, right, Luke? I mean, have you had one yet?
No, I mean, so far on it, I've been most concerned. Well, I've done the most testing with abrasion, just because that's when I do lose a fish, it's typically from abrasion, particularly snook and tarpon. They just rub through the lines versus, I mean, the even with the strength, right? Your drag should compensate for that. Like that, you should have your drag sets that even if the strength isn't amazing, that you're not going to break off the fish. But so I've done most of the tests with abrasion, and then abrasion in particular is where I've seen the biggest disparity, benefiting monofilament over fluoro.
All right, well, I'm the judge, and we're not moving to abrasion yet. So
right,
I'm going to pull up witness Wyatt. Wyatt, have you ever lost a fish from a strength-related issue on mono or fluoro? Is the reason you kind of were in the middle? You like mono and fluoro? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So a lot of it just comes down to what makes sense for the angler. For me, I was super into fluoro. Like it was not even a question for me for a really, really long time. I was worried that the fish could see the mono, that it was costing me fish. And then I started kind of watching a lot of Luke's testing, and I realized that I would essentially be getting a lot of the same benefits using mono versus fluoro, and without having to spend as much money. So that's actually what made me start using mono a little bit more, because I mean, Seagar is so expensive, man. And I like to retie my leaders and make sure that I've got, I switch lures, not necessarily the lure itself, just jig heads a lot throughout the day. So having a good lengthy piece of leader is really important. And I go through leader a lot, cutting and switching jig heads out. So burning through a ton of Seagar is the worst thing for me. And I wanted to see if I could make that switch without it costing me fish. And I really found that maybe 1 out of 10 times, if even that, were visibility issues causing fish to not strike. There's one specific scenario where I would prefer fluorocarbon over monofilament. And it's, again, I'm one of those knuckleheads that looks at the diameter. One of the specific things that I like to use fluorocarbon for is in the late winter, and this is in North Carolina, this is a very specific thing. Those fish that are in that dirty, murky water are much more sensitive to vibrations, because that's, typically how they're hunting in that dirty water. It's not about sight for them. So they're in tune with what's going on around them. They're very lethargic. And I personally feel that the diameter of the line, being able to go as light as possible, is going to make those fish more willing to strike, because they don't sense that something's off. With monofilament, if I want to have a very light line, I'm usually in the wintertime bumping down my line. I'm going to go down to 15, sometimes even 12-pound test. And, the fluorocarbon is so much thinner. It's got much more subtle of a presence in the water. And I would not want to use mono in that situation, because there's a possibility that vibration is going to kind of scare off those redfish that I am going to need that strength for. So with the fluorocarbon, I get the benefit of that same strength with a slightly thinner diameter. I don't think that this is going to be a huge deal, but that for that specific scenario, I definitely am going to make that choice. In a tournament setting where I don't want to leave anything to chance, I'm always going to use fluorocarbon, just because there is a very good argument, as we'll talk later on about. Justin, I know he's got a lot of information on the visibility side of things. I don't want to take any chances when it comes to visibility in a setting where I need to be catching fish. On normal days, I don't want to spend the money on fluorocarbon. So it's very rare that I purchase spools. I've got some that, I used to burn through a lot, and I stopped doing that. Now I just use the Andy, and it works just as fine on those days where I'm just going out to catch fish and there's not really anything on the line. But even that 1 out of 10 fish can really make a difference on tournament day. So It's just depending on the situation. I would say very rarely do I use fluorocarbon anymore. And I've made the switch just from an economic standpoint to using monofilament a lot more. But I will still say the reason I raised my hand is because I do believe that it is the better line, but is it worth it in 90% of situations? No.
But why do you believe it's better? That's what we're trying to get down to. Is it the placebo effect that you've just like I only use fluoro. I was like poo-pooing on mono. And now I've watched Luke for the last year, Luke only uses mono. The dude catches more fish than most people I know. I would say your fish catching's actually gone up. So is it, have you think you're losing fish?
I wouldn't say that it's a tough situation because I can't see every time that the fish turns away from a lure because it felt extra vibration or it saw the line. What I'm saying is it's very unlikely that scenario is going to happen often. I don't think I'm losing out on many fish. Like I said, it's maybe 1 out of 10 times, if even that. I don't think that situation comes into play a lot, but I'm still going to say it might be the placebo effect for me. I'm not giving a concrete answer on this one because
you're certainly not, Wyatt. Certainly not.
Yeah, we need to do more testing on the visibility side of things. Obviously, we'll never be able to see through the fish's eyes, but the refraction stuff that we're going to talk about here soon, it's a measurable difference. And I do believe that is something important. And I don't want to leave that kind of stuff to chance when there are things on the line. So
that's you're saying.
I'll go for it, Justin.
You're just saying that you plead the fifth, basically.
That's what I heard.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, we're in a courtroom setting. I'm pleading the fifth.
So speaking of things on the line, I want to pull up the next witness, Tony Acevedo. So Tony, you're kind of a gym rat, pretty strong dude. Let's imagine you're laying on the floor and 30 feet up above you is a 45-pound dumbbell. And you get to choose, do you want it to be tied on 20-pound mono or 20-pound fluoro? And if it breaks due to strength, it is going to come right down somewhere around your lower stomach or even your jimmies. Which one do you choose, Tony?
Well, that'd be a tough one. I think I'd have to go with heavier mono or heavier fluoro.
No, I knew I'd get him. That's a good lawyer. They put you in a tough situation.
Now, so what I was going to say is, I've never really had a failure on the mono or fluoro side when fishing inshore, because if you think about the leader, the whole purpose of it is to absorb shock, absorb abrasion. You're typically going to be tying on leader that's heavier than your main line, so it better not break before your main line does. So that's my whole take on the whole breaking thing. I've used mono and fluoro. I initially started out using fluoro, so I've always stuck with it. One of those people, like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So I just never switched over to mono fully. But if I run out of fluoro, I will, no questions asked, I'll use mono if I have it laying around. But like I said, like Wyatt touched on the visibility underwater. That's what really got me hooked on fluoro even before I started inshore fishing. I've offshore fished a lot before I started inshore fishing. And I just remember being on a boat one day and this guy was using like 20 feet of fluorocarbon and he swore by it and he was catching fish like nonstop. And then he had a guy right next to him doing the same thing with monofilament that was a little bit heavier and the guy wasn't catching anything. So I was like, there's got to be something going on here if these guys are so, pro fluorocarbon when they're fishing, especially if it's highly pressured fish or the water is super clear. That's where I think the real decision comes in as opposed to actual breaking strength, in my opinion.
That's good. Well, we're going to get to that in a second. So I'll say for strength, kind of in the middle. It's we'll call it a hanging Chad, if that's the right term. On to abrasion. Who's got some abrasion? Luke, you've done a lot of testing here. Maybe we'll start with you and we'll let everyone else try to beat up your results.
Yeah, so this was the first test I did, and I literally did it to prove how much better fluoro was. Like, I was a total fluoro fan, so I want everybody to know that this isn't me just like bashing because just to bash it.
So you went in trying to prove that fluoro was better than mono.
Yeah, because I was recommending, like, this is our inshore slammer course, like our first course we did, I was recommending fluoro just because that's what everybody was saying, and that's what my buddies who I was fishing with were doing. That's what like all the people on TV were talking about. That's on all the magazines. But I never saw like any. I was a financial analyst. So I have an analytical mind, and I was like, hey, this isn't that hard to test. So I got some sandpaper, I got some wood, I built a little assembly where I could rub sandpaper on line under the same tension, right? Controlled tension with the weight, and I have this wooden dowel that I can go back and forth like a violin, kind of rubbing it back and forth across the line, or I can twist it to do like a vertical to emulate a fish that's making a run around a dock piling. So that was really what I wanted to test, because I fish a lot of docks, and so I was just trying to prove to myself why I'm spending this extra money on this fluoro line. And literally the first time I did it, it wasn't even close. I was using happened to be using Andy mono and Seagar Blue Label fluoro, and the mono crushed it. And I remember, our videographer was in there, and I was just blown away. I was like, dude, like I must have messed up. So I did it again, and I switched sides, right? So I kept, the lines were going over 2 different points. So every test I switched back and forth, keeping everything else the same. And it won on the other side too. And so I was like, you have to be kidding me. It wasn't even close. And it got to the point, but then I was like, okay, the diameter is different, right? The diameter of the mono, it's a 20 pound, both lines are 20 pounds. The diameter of the mono is, as Justin mentioned, is 0.45. So then I went around all my different fluoros, and I found one. It was the what's that? Yozuri pink label, whatever. You guys know Yozuri pink or something? It's
like
popular
hybrid fluoro. I can't remember what it was called, but it's been out for a long time.
Yeah, it's a very popular. Somebody recommended it, so I bought some, and it was 0.455. So it was a little bit thicker than the Andy. So I was okay, perfect. Now I'm going to see that the fluoro is going to beat the Andy. Andy won again. So this regular mono beat a 20 pound mono beat a 25 pound fluoro that was actually slightly thicker than the mono. So after that, I was like, that's when I became mad. Like that's when I was like, I'm like literally mad. Because most of the snook that I lose in particular is really from that snook rubbing through, especially like I used to use a lot of 20 pound fluoro, and snook are incredibly good at rubbing through 20 pound fluoro. They'll still go through 20 pound mono, but not nearly as fast. So now snook fishing, I'll actually use 30 pound mono in most cases. But yeah, so that was really, that was the first test where I was just totally blown away. And then as I've done more and more testing, I've seen similar results. And the first test was dry lines. If you go look at that video, the lines were dry. And so I had a lot of comments come in, hey, that's why I published the videos, just to get critiques. Because again, I'm not trying to sell any lines or whatever. I'm just trying to help myself not ever lose a fish. And so I soaked the lines for a couple hours, and the same thing, right? The mono still won. So far I haven't seen a fallacy in the test.
And what's interesting, you've now published multiple fluoro versus mono abrasion resistant videos, right?
Yeah.
Different brands, different scenarios. And I believe mono's won in almost every single case.
100%.
And what's interesting, because I've read through some of the comments, just like you have, and you get people on both sides of the fence, yet no one has any scientific proof. And that's what I think you use the word, you're kind of mad. You're like, man, I'm not mad at the manufacturer so much, just mad at yourself. I could have maybe caught some of these fish, maybe a little bit mad at the manufacturer. Some of this is marketing. That's just part of life. But it's interesting that like none of these brands, this is a challenge to the brands, which I think should be happening. If you're selling something that's 10x the price and you're claiming it's doing something, kind of need to be able to back it up, right?
It's pretty easy to prove. Like it took me an hour to construct that little assembly. And I mean, if I was a line manufacturer, and it's something that's easy to prove, I'd be proving it all day
long. I had 100 videos out there right on YouTube, and yet we haven't seen it. So Justin, like what's the conversation like with Seagar, whoever? We're giving Seagar some credit because they're the leader. We like them. We sell them on our site. For guys like Wyatt who love placebos and stuff. But what did they say in terms of like why don't they have any evidence that this is more abrasion resistant, or is it, than mono?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, the first thing we talked about was looking at abrasion resistance and the means in which they test. And they said we test using sandpaper, and we put the sandpaper against under the same amount of pressure of different lines, nylon, other competitive fluorocarbons. And I said, okay, we do the same thing. We've done the same thing. We've tested it the same way. I even asked to the point, I said, how are you testing abrasion on your line? Are you rubbing it back and forth, left and right? Are you running it on like a kind of like a sander, where you're running it in line with the same strands of the fluorocarbon? And I mean, to the best of my knowledge, they do both ways, or they test a myriad of different ways, and they have stated that it is a superior to an as an abrasion standpoint. We didn't go so far into all the different quality control testing. I think what I wanted to look into with them was, what are the properties of fluorocarbon compared to the properties of monofilament that make it a superior line in terms of leader material? And because there's main lines for fluoro, there's main lines obviously for mono, there's even copolymer fluorocarbon coated lines, which we kind of talked about a little bit too. There's a lot of different lines out there, and we wanted to approach this from a leader material standpoint, or as a leader trace to put on when targeting inshore species specifically. So we had a big checklist, and I said, can you break down all the different factors of a 100% fluorocarbon line? And to back up a little bit, I think the reason why we keep bringing up Seaguar is that their story is cool. They have immense quality control, from creating their resin from the very beginning of the process, to extruding the actual line in-house, to putting it on what they call their level wind process, which is, if you notice on all the Seaguar spools, it's perfectly machine wound onto the spool, which is great from a quality standpoint, because the lines are not crossing over each other and have uneven pressure and leave dents or imperfections on the line, which happens on traditional mono and most other fluoro spools out there. So from a quality control standpoint, we keep mentioning Seaguar because they really are the leaders of fluorocarbon, and we want to acknowledge what place that has against all these other factors that we're looking at in a line. So when we talk about 100% fluorocarbon, he went through all the facts and all the factors of the line, and I wrote them all down. And first and foremost, the one at the very, very top of the thing that they are 100% confident on is the refraction of light that the fluorocarbon has, and it's similar for refraction to water. So he gave me the numbers. He said water is at, if we want to give it a number, water is at 1.33, I think. Okay. Fluorocarbon is at 1.42, and then other traditional nylons are at 1.62 to 1.65 and higher. On that scale, fluorocarbon being the closest to water, it makes it much more clear underwater. And Luke, pick up on that, because we talked about the difference between
objection,
refraction.
Your Honor. We're still on abrasion, not visibility. Objection, Your Honor.
Are we still on abrasion?
I'll be happy to have that conversation too. We'll
okay.
Wait.
Yeah, that's the final one. That's the visibility part. That's what we're
okay. So objection, irrelevant.
Wyatt, what do you got? Witness Wyatt, come up to the stand.
So I know I talked about being pro fluoro earlier. This one on the abrasion, I'm 100% siding with mono. I have lost a lot of fish because I have a small, tiny little nick in the line. Any kind of fraying. When I talked about going through spools of Seaguar so fast, again, I was fishing in North Carolina where you had all these oysters. They'd get any kind of fraying on them. That line was compromised. I lost a lot of redfish, and it started breaking my heart because any kind of small inconsistency in the strength of that was going to compromise the line. So I was constantly tying on new leaders. It became a pain, but I've seen firsthand how the mono, I use this when I go for Spanish mackerel off the piers, and I'll chuck this and it can get torn up by those Spanish. And it holds up really well, even when it has nicks. It holds that strength a lot better, even when it's frayed. And I'll continue fishing it just because Spanish runs so fast. I want to keep getting lines in the water. So that's another advantage that mono has. If you're fishing high pressure scenarios like that, where you need to continue to put lines in the water and you don't have time to retie because you got one tiny little nick, which I kid you not, I was having to do with Seaguar. It's the mono wins hands down. So that's a big part of it for me is, the abrasion resistance. you've got my vote 100% on mono. I've seen it firsthand. I've lost a lot of fish with fluorocarbon, and I've wasted a lot of money having to retie because of one very small compromise on that line.
Cool. I think Bob Seeger is going to come here and sue you if you use his name one more time, Wyatt.
I think Luke would agree with me on this one on different fluorocarbons and their abrasion resistance, like Berkeley Vanish versus Seagar, like a softer fluorocarbon versus a harder fluorocarbon. So I've been using Berkeley Vanish a lot. You know, it's cheaper, it's softer, you know, it's a little bit more limp, it stretches a little bit more, and I seem to lose less snook and tarpon on that compared to like a thicker line like Seagar, or I want to say thicker, but you know, it just feels like a tougher, denser line. Like Wyatt said, if it gets a little nick in it, it just kind of basically ruins a line and you have to retie. I have thrown Berkeley Vanish, you know, multiple times with the line already frayed up, caught multiple snook until, you know, it turns completely white. Then it's usually when I change it out. But Luke, you've done a test on that, haven't you?
Yeah, so I tested out the I still have the old lines here, the Vanish, and I did the main spool Vanish, the 200-yard spool, not the leader line, just because so far I've tested leader line and main line, and they all seem to be about the same. So I just save money and get the main one. So I tested the main line Vanish versus the leader spool Seagar. Seagar actually won. This is about 20 pounds, and they're about the same. It's 0.4. The Seagar is slightly thicker. It's 0.405 versus the straight 0.4 on the Vanish. This won in the knot contest by a pretty good amount, but then this won by a good amount on abrasion. So it was interesting that they did a really good job on the knot strength, but for whatever reason, this Vanish beat it on the abrasion test, to the point where now this is what I use. Like I will not spend the extra money for the leader lines. Now I just get if I am to ever use fluorocarbon, which I haven't in like about a year, I would just go with the Vanish, the main spool, because you can get it. This is like 6 cents a yard, I think, something like that. I can't remember the exact numbers. And it was an enormous difference. It was like the same cost of the spool, but one you get 200 yards, one you get 25. So I was shocked on that one too. Again, I always thought that like this was always going to be the number one. It did a great job on the knot test compared to other fluoros, but on the abrasion side, I believe this has been the best abrasion line that I've done so far. And this is what like Peter Deeks uses as well, the Vanish. I think he used the leader spools though. But again, like so far I did like most lines don't have like the exact same leader and main line, so it's really hard to test the two. I did test out the Seagar red label because they had a 25-yard leader spool and then a 200-yard main line, and it was the same diameter. I tested out the knot strength; it was pretty much the same, and I tested out the abrasion resistance. It was pretty much the same. So to me, it seemed like it was just the same line, just one was in a more convenient spool.
Cool. So Wyatt, I'm going to give you the final vote on this one for the abrasion, mono or fluoro.
Oh, by far, the mono is going to win this one, in my opinion.
So we got a hanging Chad, we got mono, and then now for the third one, visibility. This is where there's obviously going to be some debate. It's tough to be able, like even that book that we've referenced quite a bit, What Fish See Underwater, and then that was done by an actual eye doctor who was an avid fisherman. And then we've got Mark Sosin, who did one about what fish see underwater. And by the way, it's not what fishermen see in a tackle store. So this is a tough one. But I know you had a great conversation, Justin, which you were kind of getting at before we had that objection. To tell us what you learned on that call with Seagar today.
So the process that they check the refraction of their line against water. So I was kind of given those numbers of the clarity of the line in the water. And that's where I had segued to Luke, because we actually started when we were having conversation about this over, past couple of days. And I was mentioning refraction and I mentioned reflection, and I was kind of mixing up the two terms of refraction and reflection. And Luke's like, they're totally different things. I'm like, yeah, explain that to me. He said, well, one is how the light bends through something, and then one is how it gives off kind of a mirrored image, or like a shine or a sheen would be reflection, and refraction is how light bends through a particular object. And to Seagar's point, the refraction index of their fluorocarbon, their 100% fluorocarbon, is the closest to water, whereas a nylon would be, the refraction index is higher, so it's not as clear in the water. That's kind of where we left it at, and he gave me some figures and numbers as an average for nylons, and where there stands and where pure water stands. And I mean, he said that, there's difference of like a decibel. It makes a big difference in terms of the clarity of the water. We haven't tested it amongst ourselves to see, at least to our eyes, which ones, visibly look clearer, or a little more opaque, or a little easier to see. But for me, the biggest thing, right now in all this conversation we've had about mono versus fluoro, and whether we're on one side of the fence or the other, and Luke has been very adamant about, like, I'm on this side of the fence because I literally tested all these things, and you can't prove against the tests that I've done. And he's right on in a lot of regards, to strength and to abrasion resistance. The line clarity side, I still think, is yet to be determined. I think that for me, and Wyatt touched base on it, in tournaments, and I mentioned it on a recent tournament podcast, I don't like leaving anything to chance. I have had too many times where I'm in Punta Gorda and I see a 27-inch redfish up against the shoreline, and I've had fluorocarbon always, because if I had mono, and I never fished with mono leader on the flats, most of my fishing, I don't necessarily need the abrasion resistance or the knot strength. I'm in open grass flats where I can bury the hook in a redfish on a lighter rod and lighter leader, and I'm not worried about breaking a fish off. But if I'm presenting to fish with a soft plastic in shallow, crystal clear water, and they turn away, I'm less likely to blame the fluorocarbon and them seeing the line. But if I had monofilament, I might say, oh my gosh, I missed that fish because he saw the line. I don't have any way to substantiate that, to prove that, but that's what, I won't sleep at night. If I go home thinking I could have landed a $2,000 fish and I missed it because I used mono leader, I mean, I'm sure many fishermen probably think and feel that way, but don't really have a full way to prove it. I'm excited to see Luke put all these different lines, unbiased, together and put it underwater and get some video content to see if we can really see much of a difference. He's like, boom, black and white, crystal clear. You'll know right off the bat. So Seagar is very confident that the number one focus of fluorocarbon and why it's made is to be a objectively clearer line than traditional nylons.
So let's take your example of Punta Gorda, I don't know, foot of water, 2 feet of water, whatever it is. Their point is they have the closest refraction number, right, down to a decimal, to water. What about reflection? Because you have that in a foot of water. There's also going to be the sun coming down on. I assume if you can see the red, there's some sun out. And is it reflecting where it's now visible? Like, talk through those two different terms, because those are two different things. Like, I could see Tony's example of being on a offshore, party boat going fishing down 200. Just from reading the books I've read about how light, passes through things at different levels. But it's interesting in a foot or two of water if it really makes a difference or not.
I mean, we ended up getting the two terms mixed up in the conversation. Refraction and reflection seemed to be used pretty universally in that conversation. So we didn't really identify whether there's more reflection on the line versus nylon. We couldn't really, determine that. I don't know that I'd be able to determine it. To Luke's point, if we're looking at 0.05 millimeter diameter difference, is the fish really going to know? I don't know. That's a really small measurement. We can't even see it if something's moving at a pretty quick pace. Redfish and game fish are pretty instinctual. They just attack out of either they're hungry or they're upset at something, and it's an instinct. But I'm not sure. I don't know that I can differentiate reflection from refraction. Tony, chime in, man.
Tony, he looks smart, so he's got to be the smartest guy on here.
Nah, don't let the glasses fool you. So I think reflection is super important, because fish, they clearly see flash. We have flashy lures, bait fish flash in the water. And if something flashes close to them and, it catches them off guard, I highly think that's going to spook them away. And I've seen, I've taken underwater footage of fluorocarbon, underwater footage of lures, and I can clearly see that line flashing in the sunlight in shallow water. So that 3-inch lure now becomes a 2.5 foot lure, you know, because of all that flash. So
A hog leg.
a hog leg slam shady. But yeah, reflection I think is super important. On a cloudy day, you know, you don't notice it as much in 2 feet of water compared to like a bright sunny day. And that's just like my own personal experience actually seeing the line in the water.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And so I studied this a lot. So I've been thinking for a while on the visibility test on just how to make it fair. And so I was doing some research, trying to understand the science behind it. And so the science of fluoro always points to refraction. You will always see the refraction being highlighted. You will not see reflection being highlighted. So far, I have not seen any scientific study showing that fluoro has a better reflection capability compared to mono. And the difference, just so anybody's confused, reflection is the light bouncing off of the outside of the line, bouncing away. As what Tony said, we can clearly see it on both mono and fluoro. There doesn't seem to be any difference. And then refraction is the bending of light that actually the light that actually goes through the line. How much does it bend? And my argument is that reflection is more important. Number one, like I don't think refraction is that important, particularly for thin lines. Like if we're using 30-pound line or 20-pound line, it's so thin that refraction, the bending of light through with a little tiny little line probably doesn't make a difference. I can't say for sure. It's hard to prove one way or the other. But to an actual fish, I just don't think that is nearly as important as the reflection.
All right. So do you know which way it bends? Do you want it to bend? Do you want it to bend left, right, sideways?
I don't know. I just think it was a really good marketing hook to because there's actually science to prove something that, you know, you would think less bending the light is good, right? It probably is. I don't know. It might be. But it's really hard to prove it wrong because like Justin said, right? If he spooked a fish in a foot of water, was it the line being too thick? Was it the reflection, or was it refraction?
Or was it him spooking the fish, you know, and moving in his kayak?
Was it the wind catching the line and moving a little bit too close? The landing was a little bit too close to the fish?
Was it the bald eagle that flew over and spooked the fish with the shadow?
Did an alien, was like an UFO like hovering somewhere in the background? And
witness Wyatt.
Yeah, help me out here, Wyatt. Help me.
So here's a big thing for me when it comes to the fluorocarbon spooking argument. A lot of us, you know, have gone after shallow water redfish, and I'm sure we can all attest to this. It's not usually when the lure passes in front of the fish that it spooks off. It's when the line is laying close to the fish. Like if you've cast it over it and the line's laying over its head or it's laying over its back. When we talk about reflection and refraction, how much light, if this, you know, if you're watching the video, if my hand is the line diameter, right? So if the light is coming down through the surface of the water and it's coming like this, there's going to be a shadow that gets created. And you can see the shadow when you're fishing with mono. I've looked at this because I went through this when I was doing another video on, you know, how light affects lures. But basically, I think it's the shadow of the line as well that can spook fish. And when we talk about how light is refracts and goes through the line on fluoro, is there more? The argument here, in my opinion, is it going to create as much of a shadow, if at all? And I think that's something really important to consider with redfish that are usually focused on the bottom. I don't necessarily believe, and this is why I think the diameter is important too. Is it really, you know, what they're feeling and where their focus is? I think fluorocarbon puts more positive variables on our side because that spooking of the shadow, it's just something that I've seen fish spook off of before, definitely. If my line lays across their back, I've seen them spook off. Now, whether they felt the line on their back or, you know, and a lot of times it's not actually on their back, whether they felt the presence of it because of the diameter of it moving through the water, or if they saw the shadow of the line, that lure is not usually near them when that happens. I'm trying to lead a fish, maybe it moves a little bit faster. So thinking about reflection and refraction, maybe for some other species that are a little bit more sight focused, like snook and trout, the sight thing might be a little bit more of a factor. And I know when I'm targeting trout, I definitely in winter scenarios where the water's really clear, definitely I'm using fluorocarbon. But it's hard to measure that. And I think that it's going to be a tough thing to call on this final aspect of mono versus fluoro. But when we talk about refraction, I think one thing that's not necessarily going to be a theory here, because we can actually go out and see how much of a shadow there is, and we'll be able to take the pictures and see. I've personally seen that there is a little bit less of a shadow with the fluoro. And I think that's because it allows more light to pass through it. Now, the reflection side of things, I can very clearly see the fluorocarbon in the water just as well as I can see the mono. I can't tell much of a difference there. Now, when you get underwater, that changes. And as Tony's talked about with the underwater footage, you can see a slight bit of difference, I think, once you get under the water, just because if you look at how light passes through the surface of water, again, this is a lot. I did a lot of studying on this to break down how lure color is affected at different columns of the water and in different clarities. As you get further down, less light is able to get to the bottom of wherever it is you're fishing. So there might be a difference in, what we see. And I'm very excited to see the imagery that Luke's going to take during this test at different depths. I think that's really where we're going to see the most difference, because there's not as much light that's going to get further down at the very top of the water column, which is where most people are making these observations. Oh, I can clearly see fluoro, or I can clearly see mono. As you get further down, I think that's where we're going to start seeing measurable, or at least quantifiable, differences in Luke's test. So I'm really excited to see all that. But I guess the point of everything I'm getting to here is, let's not count out refraction as well, especially in sight fishing scenarios where we're putting lures close to fish, we're trying to position correctly, because there is shadows that might spook that fish as well. And you might think that's not really too big of a thing, but I've seen ripples on the surface of a water from wind spook fish off. So it's things that little things that add up, maybe 10% here, 10% there. We talk about fluoro. There's a couple small factors, diameter and the refraction, that start to kind of add up. And, as Justin said, in tournament situations or wherever, something's on the line, maybe you're just trying to outfish your buddy for a beer or something, might want to tie on some fluoro.
On that shadow thing, why was it the same pound lines, or were the diameters the same? If the diameter difference was the cause of a shadow difference.
Now that you bring that up, that could be something. That could be what it was, because I used 20 pound. So I had 20 pound on my top water and 20 pound on my subsurface, and I can see the line laying, and it's just like,
All right, for court, we got to throw out that evidence. Could have been from diameter. We got to. Could have been from
diameter. You're right. You're right.
You heard it.
And again, fluoro typically has a thinner diameter than mono. So again, that would put fluoro in the lead for visibility if it is thinner.
Yeah, but just get a thinner mono, right? Like instead of a 25 pound fluoro, get a 20 pound mono, and it's the same diameter. If you equate my real point is, every time I equate the diameters on the diameter to diameter basis for abrasion and knot strength, the traditional mono seems to win. So that's like, even like a 15 pound. I want to test a 15 pound Andy against a 20. Justin, was that the diameter about the same? Is that what you were saying earlier?
Yeah. 15 pound Andy and 20 pound Seaguar Blue Label are like neck and neck in terms of diameter.
That'll be interesting.
Can't believe I'm saying this, but I mean, like, we're, Judge, we need to go back to you. Can you give us a reminder here of where we're sitting in terms of our categories? We've got knot strength, we've got abrasion, and we've got clarity. Remind us where we're sitting right now, because it sounds like it's, 2 siding with mono and 1 kind of on the fence of fluoro. Where are we sitting, Judge?
Yeah, that's kind of it. I mean, I threw in a hanging chad just to make this interesting, but most of the 3 votes, but there's also, you could also argue that visibility is the most important, right? I mean, you talked about earlier, Justin, but there's a million scenarios, right? Like, you could say if you're fishing at nighttime in dirty water, none of this stuff matters at all. Like, why would you ever spend that much money on fluoro if you're
I got to piggyback on that, because if I'm tarpon fishing at night, or if I'm fishing for snook at Sebastian, I don't use fluoro. because I'm going to get frayed off. I'm going to blow through stuff pretty quick. I'm going to jump, 2, 3, 4 tarpon, and they're going to fray it, beyond belief. And mono is just more economical. And at night, I really don't think they care. Like, I'm running 125-pound mono as leader when I go tarpon fishing. I mean, there's even guys down, Port Charlotte as an example, or Punta Gorda, at El Jobin. I learned from somebody that uses single strand wire when he fishes with flare hawks for snook. And I was like, hold on now, I'm offended. And he's like, no, it doesn't make any bit of difference at night. These fish are reactionary. They're structure oriented. They're going to swipe something that comes by them. It's the clarity and the visibility does not matter, especially at night. I might not throw single strand in the daytime, but he outfished me on single strand, and I had 60-pound fluoro, believing that I was going to make a difference, and it didn't. So the night thing's just out the window. That's unrelated, in my opinion.
Curious to what the guides would say too in the comment section. Definitely leave your comments.
Oh,
but,
please.
If a guide is burning through, a couple hundred yards of fluorocarbon every week, that can get pretty pricey, unless of course they're sponsored. But
that's part of the problem, right? I mean, some of the comments, they're from guides who were 100% being paid or sponsored by one of the two, whether they're sponsored by Andy or by Cigar, Zuri, who, it doesn't matter. If you're sponsored, the vote doesn't really count as much if you're being paid to say something. We want unbiased, and I'd love to see proof from all these brands, challenge all of them. I think
save me a lot of time to have a build these sneaking test assemblies.
Yeah, I mean, the consumers kind of demand. So I'm hoping there's some manufacturers listening to this that will do some of that, and we're not trying to discredit any of this stuff, especially not like the number they're putting on their all that stuff we get. This is more of, hey, is it worth it to spend the extra money on fluoro? That's versus mono. That's one argument, and then you have the other argument, which is, is it worth it getting the fluoro leader line versus just normal main line leader? That's a whole different debate that we can have, and we've kind of already hammered that pretty hard on a prior podcast. But I don't know, guys. I mean, we got 3. I mean, if I throw a 4th one in, mono's going to win, and that's cost, right? And that's kind of a 4th piece. I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. But I don't know. I understand your point, Wyatt, and really in Justin. It's that, what if, right? What if, out of 100 fish, I might miss one because it's the perfect light refractory? Because I'm agreeing with Luke on strength and abrasion. Just, I mean, that many tests don't lie. And he was trying to prove the opposite, which is the funny part. But man, I'm gonna have to go with mono in general as the judge, but still see a reason to have a little bit of fluoro in your back pocket, just in case. I mean, even if it's a placebo. I get it. I mean,
I got to add one more quick thing. I just want to make sure we leave no stone unturned. The only other big thing that they talked about was the properties of the line and which one absorbs water and which one doesn't. So stating that fluorocarbon does not absorb water and the traditional nylon does. And Luke and I talked about it, and we said, in your testing of abrasion and knot strength, did you soak the lines in water? And he's like, yeah, I soaked them all for a couple of hours, and then I tested it. And, thinking about all the times that I leave my leader tied on from one trip to the next, if I got a good uni and I got a good, 5-foot section of fluoro on there, I'm like, man, I really don't want to chop that off. If I had a light day of fishing, I only caught 1 or 2 fish on it, and I rinse it off when I get home, I sometimes I'll tell myself, you know what? I'll keep that fluoro on. I'm just going to go out and have fun for the day. If you kept your same leader on, 15, 20, 25, I don't know how many trips and how long your line gets exposed to sun and to water, does the integrity of the line deteriorate quicker with monofilament than with fluoro because of the material itself? And if it will nylon absorb water more than fluorocarbon, and because of that, it's compromised long term. Like, would it pay you in the long run to keep a leader on if you always had a slam shady on an 1/8 ounce jig head, okay, and you super glued it on there and you were using that all the time and you were only going for trout and you never frayed up your leader? Is the fluorocarbon going to outlast the mono in terms of its structural integrity? I don't know. I really don't know, but that is worth questioning, and I do not know how to test it. And that's why we have Luke to test these things, because it's a question that I wonder now, if that's the property of the line, where does that fall into the scale of testing?
Yeah, my response would be that's really hard to test, but like, this is like 10 times less expensive. So I would just say replace your line every time, and that way you're guaranteed to have, you know, good line.
If you go 20 trips with the same leader, you ain't fishing hard enough, Bob. Come on.
Yeah.
If anything, I would retie the knots. Like I think the knots would be the first thing to go before the actual line itself.
Yeah.
And that's all. And that's just from all the knot contests. It's all the breaks are at the knot, and even casting knots through guides too. Like if you're casting knots through guides on a continuous basis, 100% change your leaders every trip, because it'll wear that friction. It's not a lot of friction, but no matter what knot you're tying, that impact hitting the guides will weaken it. The FG will actually slip off in some cases.
I have lost big poppers throwing the FG through my guides over and over and over. It's a heavy popper, heavy leader in line, and it just unravels or it pops. It happens.
Yeah, not good. And I think one, since we're talking about lines too, one fallacy that I believe multiple fallacies on fluoro. First, I thought it was invisible. I thought it was better in abrasion, and I thought it had stronger knots. I've proved 2 out of the 3 wrong, and I'm still debating the third.
Well, for the record, it's not invisible. Like even they're not.
No.
Tony, we've all proven
right.
that. Yeah. But is it less visible than mono?
Yeah. But another thing, I thought that fluoro sunk and mono floated, and that is not true either. So I've heard the comment come on a lot. So I did a test on that, and actually sunk. I got seawater and normal water and just sunk the lines, like little small segments of it, and both of them sunk. So mono does sink. Fluoro sinks about 2 times faster though. So fluoro does sink faster, but mono doesn't float. So that's, a lot of people say they use one for top water, one for subsurface lures, because one floats and one sinks. Like they all sink. It's just different rates.
That's good. All right. So real quick, Luke, tell us what you're going to do with this. You teased this whole underwater, because this is really where it comes down to. So what exactly is your plan? If anyone's made it this far, they deserve to know.
Yeah. So I have this, for those who are watching, I have this picture frame, and so just did 20 notches across, all equidistant. And so I'm going to have my secret answer key. I'm going to tie 20 lines. Some will be fluoro, some will be mono. They're going to be different diameters, right? And then have them all on here. They're all going to be, I'll try to get the same tension as good as I can. And then I'm just going to take it. This will be a long contest, because I'll take it on, like when we go down the Keys next, I'll take it down there for the really clear water. I'll take it here in St. Pete around some grass, right? And so I'm going to shine toward the bottom. I'm going to shine like a fish's eye looking up on like sunny days, cloudy days, towards the bottom, on seagrass, on sand, just different color backgrounds, and just see what works. And again, it could very well prove that fluoro is way better. I don't know. I'm doubtful, but I think it's going to be about the same personally, but it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting now. And again, this still won't prove it one way or the other. It's just going to be a little bit more data to try to come up with our best conclusion, because this is something that's literally impossible to prove one way or the other.
Cool. It's good stuff.
Otherwise the line manufacturers would have already done it, and they would have shown why their line is so awesome.
All right. So here's the great news, guys. We don't have all the answers, but we got a lot of them. And the even better news is we got everything we just talked about at fishstrong.com. So we do like to keep all that. We're actually working on a pretty cool index, if you will, where we're going to be listing just the top products in every area. It's something that's never really been done before, and we've been talking about it a lot behind the scenes. And I think it's one of the most requested things that we get, both publicly and of course in our insider club, where we have a whole private community, and people go, hey, like for this scenario, what do you guys recommend for this rod? What do you recommend for this reel, this line? What type of lures do you recommend in this scenario? What kind of jig heads? And so we're just gonna have a list, and it's gonna be just the 100 things, like the must-have things based on real testing, not just how we feel about it. And we're putting that together, so it's gonna be pretty awesome. And we're gonna have all that, and a lot of it's already there at fishstrong.com. That's fishstrong.com, our tackle store. And as an insider member, if you haven't join today. You get up to 20%, actually up now 30% in some cases, off everything in the store. Pretty awesome. And now we have some new products like Blackout Chum that just came out, and Power Prawns, a few other things we're working on behind the scenes that will only be available to our insider members. It's less than a cup of coffee every single day. It is a complete no-brainer. On the water tips, we have all kinds of premium education. We have the discounts I mentioned, and in the private community, it's Anglers Helping Anglers. About 20,000 of us now in there, and including many full-time guides, ton of weekend warriors, even some newbies, and just anyone who wants to be better, to catch more fish in less time, become more consistent, and end of the day, have more fun, and of course, save money on things like this. And so fishstrong.com is the store. Big question, guys. Fishstrong.com. You go there today. Which one are you buying? Mono or fluoro? Luke?
Yeah, I need to load up on some more mono. This is all
right.
I've been using last 4 or 5 months. Is literally all I've been using, and it's been working.
All right. So Luke is going to fishstrong.com to buy more mono. Justin, you're going to fishstrong.com. Fishstrong.com. What are you buying?
I have never used monofilament leader for saltwater fishing applications, and I now feel like I need to test out 20-pound fluorocarbon or a 20-pound monofilament, Andy, when sight fishing for redfish, which is what I like to do the most. So I'm gonna give mono a whirl.
Get that wallet out. I'll be looking for your order to come in.
Oh boy.
Tony, fishstrong.com. You going there this week? What are you buying? Mono or fluoro?
I'm buying fluoro. Sorry, guys.
Oh, but yeah, just wait till we have to tie it up to that 40-pound dumbbell. I see a new this is gonna be team building at its finest for our
I
next
can
meeting.
actually try that later when I go work out. I'll let you know how it goes.
Okay.
Yeah, get a bag of ice ready. All right, Wyatt, fishstrong.com. What are you buying?
Yeah, I mean, mono is pretty dirt cheap, and you can get it a lot of places. The 20% off that I get for being an insider, I can spend that extra little bit on the fluorocarbon for when I need it. So I think if I'm going to use my discount, I'll probably go ahead and grab that fluoro. That's not to say that when I do run out of mono, I'm not going to grab some, but I definitely am hurting for some fluoro.
So it's
2-2.
down to me. So we got 2 fluoros, 2 monos.
Oh. You got a mono out of a guy that was like, oh, I will take fluoro to the grave. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is purely for experimental sake. I'm gonna side with mono still, but it hurts. It hurts to say it. So Joe, just, what's the final word here?
Guys, I'm buying both. I'm a tackle freak. I want it all. I want a little bit of everything. Bring out that index of 100. I'm buying one of everything.
That's you pleading the fifth is all that is, Joe. And
Yeah.
No, in all honesty, I still do buy both, but I fish with Luke. I'm fortunate enough to fish with him all the time. And everyone asks like, hey, what do you do? I was like, I do whatever Luke does. So I do like to mimic him. It works. And so I am buying mono. But I probably will continue to buy both because it's so funny how we are as humans that even though like scientific proof could say that one thing's better, and yet sometimes we still do the other, right? And it happens with taste tests. Like we've laughed at that coffee test that what's his name, Jimmy Kimmel did, and it's the same coffee, and you just tell people this is a $4 one and this is a $1 one, and people are like, oh man, I can smell the hint of oak.
Costa Rican bean coffee. Like it's a hilarious.
And they're like, it's actually the exact same coffee. But it's just funny. We always want to have that advantage over the fish, right? We always want to have that edge. And so that there's still part of me that I understand it. But I also think if you are a manufacturer, that is a challenge to all of us, right? Just to become better and just have more proof out there, more evidence, if you will, on why things are better. It just helps us understand it. I mean, even this conversation, right? We learned a lot, even talking about reflection versus refraction. I guarantee most people don't know the difference. There's probably people at these manufacturers that don't know the difference. It's just that, hey, we've been told one thing, or, we saw ABC guy talking head say, hey, this is the best thing out there without really any evidence. And we just kind of trust it sometimes. So that's part of our job. We want to be the consumer reports out there. These guys that you're seeing and you're hearing from, and they're out in the water every single week, putting stuff to the test. We've had tons of people offer sponsorships. We reject every single one because we want to be unbiased. We want to be able to say, hey, this works because we spent our hard-earned money on it and it just flat out catches fish, not because, some sponsor said it was the coolest thing since sliced bread. So hope you guys will join us in the Insider Club. We're doing a lot of neat things. We're introducing what we're calling our inner circle. It used to be private only for our kind of our exclusive high-end customers. And now we are going to open it up to everyone. We stopped charging them and now going to open up. It was just so impactful. And at the end of the day, our mission is to help as many people as we can. And we're going to start doing that here right now for all members. And that was $97 a month. And so now you're getting that completely for free when you join the Insider Club today. So join us at saltstrong.com and then make sure to find this. I know some people will listen to this on iTunes and Stitcher and all the other places, Spotify, some watch it on YouTube. Definitely go over to saltstrong.com. That's where we actually check every comment. If it's on social media, sometimes not so much. So make sure to go to saltstrong.com, find this post, and you'll have all the show notes in there and you can leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. So anything else, guys? Any final words before we give you the final sentence and go to mono and fluoro jail?
No, I think we covered a lot.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
That was
Actually, I would just request, just leave. I'll wait until like a couple days after this video goes live to fill these 20 lines. I would be curious to know what lines you'd like me to test out. I already have like 10 or 12, and I want to be like the 20 to 30 pound range, because that's what seems like that's what most inshore anglers are using. So yeah, let me know what lines, whether it's fluoro or mono, whatever. I'm going to be loading it probably half and half.
cool. Just all the top brands.
Yeah, I do the top ones, and that's what I have so far. I've kind of got the top ones, but there's just a ton of different brands. Like, it's mind blowing how many. You can go to one store and there's a selection of 20, and you go to another store, there's another selection of 20 that are all like different lines. It's there's an absolute ton out there. So yeah, just be curious to hear what you guys want to get tested.
Cool. All right, guys, we out. That was a fun one.
Is there?
All right.
Talk to you on the next episode. Peace.
Hey.